Welcome to Demon Sleep. I'm here to help you unwind tonight. If you enjoy this space, feel free to like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It makes this feel like a shared night across the world. These stories are different and I'm glad you're here. Dim the lights, let the room settle, and let's begin. Story 1. The house waited at the edge of the Vermont hillside like it was trying not to be seen. Leo stood at the bottom of the driveway, watching snow erase the world inch by inch. The place felt smaller than memory allowed, compressed by years, by silence, by whatever had happened while he was gone. His father's truck idled in the drive, already buried under fresh snow, even though Leo had barely arrived. The storm was settling in for the long haul. It was supposed to stretch past Christmas. Someone had once told him that was a blessing. He reached into the rental car and lifted his duffel bag. His hands didn't shake. That surprised him. What shook was deeper. His chest felt bound, like something invisible had been tightened around his ribs overnight. Breathing took effort. He told himself it was just the cold, or the altitude, or nerves. There were pills for this kind of thing, and he'd taken more than prescribed. Before he reached the porch, the front door opened. Warm yellow light spilled across the snow, and his father stood there, frozen in place like he hadn't decided whether to step forward or retreat. 8 months shouldn't have done this much damage. The man in the doorway looked hollowed out, skin sagging beneath his eyes, color drained from his face, posture slightly folded inward as if he'd learned how to make himself smaller. He said something about timing, about making it before the storm got dangerous, about coming inside where it was warm. Every word sounded practiced, polished flat from repetition. Leo stepped past him into the house. He had braced himself for the idea of another woman, someone younger maybe, someone too cheerful, someone who laughed loudly to fill the gaps. He had been warned it might be difficult. That word had come up again and again, always paired with concerned eye contact and suggested adjustments to dosage. The woman by the fireplace was none of those things. She stood when she noticed him, tall, sharp-edged, her presence cutting through the room like a blade. Her face felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain, as if each feature belonged to a different person and had been assembled without checking the final result. Her dress was a deep, dark red, the color of something old and dry. She didn't offer her hand. "I'm Greta," she said, then without pause, "and you're Lon, not Leo, never leave." The name hit harder than it should have. Something cold slipped beneath his skin, and for the first time since he'd arrived, the medication felt useless. He didn't respond. He looked past her toward the staircase, toward the narrow hallway that led to the rooms upstairs. "Where Lucy?" he asked. Greta moved before his father could answer. She placed herself between Leo and the stairs with smooth precision, like she'd practiced the motion. Like this wasn't the first time she blocked someone's path. "She's resting," Greta said calmly. "The preparations have been demanding." "Preparations for what?" Her smile arrived slowly, stretching too far, showing too much. "Christmas," she said, as if the answer were obvious, as if Christmas were something that required secrecy, as if it demanded more than lights and a tree and wrapped gifts. Leo felt the room closing in. The walls seemed nearer than they should have been. The air felt thick, heavy with heat and pine, and something metallic he couldn't place. His father touched his elbow. The gesture was gentle, almost apologetic. He guided Leo toward the stairs, and Leo allowed it, not because he wanted to, but because stopping would mean asking questions he wasn't ready to hear the answers to. And because somewhere upstairs, behind a closed door, his sister was resting. At least, That's what they wanted him to believe. He reminded himself that he wasn't entitled to answers. The doctors had made that very clear. This wasn't his space to question anymore. Not after everything that had gone wrong. Not after the file notes, the hushed conversations, the careful language people used around him now. As they climbed the stairs, his father spoke in fragments, about routines, about how Greta helped Lucy stay focused, about progress, about moving ahead instead of looking back. The words floated upward, thin and fragile, like they might break if spoken too loudly. Leo's old bedroom greeted him like a preserved exhibit. Nothing had shifted. The same dark blue bedspread stretched tight across the mattress. The same stack of unfinished textbooks leaned against each other on the desk, pages frozen mid-semester, mid-dream. Outside the window, snow blurred the boundary between yard and forest, swallowing the line that once separated safety from wilderness. His father left him there, closing the door softly, too softly, the kind of quiet that came from fear. Leo waited. He counted each second in his head, steady and deliberate until he reached 60. Then he opened the door again. The hallway stood empty. Below, the kitchen echoed with movement, metal against metal, water rushing, Greta humming faintly. The smell drifted upward next, thick and invasive. Peppermint, not sweet, sharp. It clung to the air like a warning. His father murmured something he couldn't quite hear. Lucy's room waited at the far end of the hall. He approached it the way he'd been taught to approach closed doors before. Slow, careful, making himself visible, giving anyone inside time to stop him. No one did. The handle turned easily. Cold rushed out to meet him. That was the first mistake the room made. The radiator beneath the window should have been blazing. This house always overheated in winter, always had. But when Leo pressed his hand to the metal, it was dead cold. His breath fogged the air. The second mistake was the smell. Peppermint again, overpowering now, layered with something sterile and sour beneath it. A scent that tugged at memory. A place with white walls and stainless steel tables. A place he had been told not to think about. Lucy's bed was empty. The sheets were pulled tight, corners sharp enough to cut. On the dresser sat her hairbrush, bristles clean, unused. Beside it, a porcelain dish overflowed with candy canes. The old kind, thick and rigid, their tips narrow enough to sting skin. They'd been arranged carefully, radiating outward in a perfect star. The closet door stood open. Inside, Lucy's clothes hung in exact order, sorted by color. Reds, greens, whites, holiday shades only, nothing else. At the very back, half hidden by heavier coats, hung a dress he didn't recognize. It was dark green velvet trimmed with white lace, old-fashioned and severe. The kind of thing meant for a much smaller child, not for a 14-year-old girl. Not for Lucy. When Leo turned around, his father was there, blocking the doorway. "She's not here," his father said too quickly. "She's resting, upstairs in the attic. It's quieter there." "The attic isn't heated," Leo replied. Color flooded his father's face. Words spilled out next, about treatment plans, professional advice, what the doctors recommended. But his mouth kept moving long after the sense ran out, and his eyes refused to meet Leo's. And in that moment, standing in a freezing room that smelled like peppermint and loss, Leo understood something was very wrong. Lucy wasn't resting. She was somewhere else entirely. His father's mouth kept moving, opening and closing like the words had slipped away from him at the last second. Eventually, he settled on something safe. Leo should lie down. The drive had been long. The storm was heavy. Anyone would be worn out. Then he stepped back and shut Lucy's door, the click of the latch sounding final, deliberate. Leo stayed in the hallway after he left, leaning against the wall, feeling the medication melt uselessly through his veins. Sweet, slow, far too late to matter. Dinner came anyway. A roasted bird sat at the center of the table, steaming and golden, but it tasted wrong. Everything did. Peppermint coated his tongue, soaked into the walls, the air, the silverware. Greta had brought out the fine dishes, the ones kept hidden for decades. White porcelain edged in gold. The napkins were folded into shapes that almost resembled birds, though something about them felt off. The folds where wings should have been bent the wrong way. Lucy's chair stayed empty. Greta explained she'd already eaten. A small meal. Necessary, she said, given the outfit planned for the following evening. One must consider appearances. What outfit? Leo asked. Greta's eyes found him, wide-set, curious, entertained. The green velvet, she said lightly. She'll look lovely, like she belongs on a car. Leo's voice came out sharper than he intended. Lucy wasn't a prop. She was 14. Greta continued slicing her chicken with careful precision, each cut identical to the last. She agreed, smiling. Lucy was growing up. Growth required discipline, order. She added that children suffered most when boundaries were weak, especially after distressing events. Then she looked directly at Leo. Her expression softened, almost kind, and it made his stomach twist. We're all working on ourselves here, she said. Every one of us. Leo's hands trembled. He hid them in his lap and said nothing more. Later, when the house settled and voices drifted into the study, his father low and strained, Greta calm and immovable, Leo slipped away. He climbed the narrow staircase at the back of the hall, each step creaking under his weight. The attic door stood at the top. Locked. Of course it was. He leaned in, pressing his ear to the wood. At first there was only silence, then something faint, fragile, breathing that came too fast, too shallow, the sound of something alive trying not to be heard. He whispered her name, told her it was him, that he was there. The breathing stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing at all. Then her voice slipped through the door, thin and fractured, barely recognizable. She told him he shouldn't be here, that Greta would find out, that Greta always knew. She said Greta counted her breaths, watched her constantly. If Lucy breathed the wrong way, cried too loudly, moved without permission, she was punished, made to stand still until she fixed herself, until she became perfect. Leo told her to open the door. She said she couldn't. Only Greta had the key. The door only opened when it was time. Time for what? Leo asked. The silence stretched so long that dread settled fully into his chest. And in that quiet, he realized whatever was happening in this house had already gone too far, and Lucy was running out of time. Her voice dropped even further, thinning until it nearly vanished. Leo had to press his cheek to the door to hear her. She told him about the Christmas arrangement. She said she was required to stand without moving, no shifting, no fidgeting, no sound. Greta called it practice, said Lucy had to learn how to hold herself properly, like an ornament, like something beautiful that didn't need food or rest or tears. Greta told her their mother would have wanted it this way, that if Lucy behaved perfectly, if she tried hard enough, maybe their mother would come back. Maybe Christmas would make things right again. Lucy's words broke off mid-sentence. Footsteps echoed below. Leo pulled away from the door and ran. He barely reached his bedroom before Greta's steps appeared on the stairs, steady and unhurried. She paused outside his door, one breath, then another, long enough for his heart to slam against his ribs. Then she moved on. He heard the attic lock turn, heard her voice drift down through the ceiling, soft, lilting, soothing in a way that made his skin crawl. The kind of voice used on frightened animals, or children who didn't yet understand they were trapped. Leo pressed his palms into his thighs and stared at the ceiling until the sounds faded, and the house fell quiet again, broken only by the wind clawing at the walls. By morning, the storm had buried them. Snow had piled so high against the front door that when Leo tried to force it open, it budged only a few inches before hitting solid resistance. Through the narrow gap, the world was erased. The truck was gone beneath white drifts. The trees were faint shadows bending sideways in the wind. His rental car existed only as a vague mound, barely distinguishable from the ground. His father found him there, shoulder braced uselessly against the door. They'd have to wait it out, he said. Roads wouldn't be passable for days. The power had failed hours earlier, hadn't Leo noticed. They were running on the generator now. Electricity needed rationing. Heat needed preserving. Family needed to stay together. Leo asked about Lucy. His father stared at the floor, said Greta understood what Lucy needed, said Lucy was fine, comfortable, said she preferred the attic, said she'd asked for it. When Leo called him a liar, his father didn't protest. His jaw tightened, but he turned away and walked back toward the kitchen, where Greta was stirring something that smelled of scorched sweetness and sharp mint. Leo went back upstairs. The attic door remained locked. He knocked, whispered Lucy's name, nothing. He knocked harder, pressed his ear against the wood. No breathing this time. No sound at all. Greta appeared at the foot of the stairs, watching him with calm patience, her eyes too far apart to ever feel human. She said Lucy was asleep, that the night had been difficult, that rest was essential, that Leo was interfering with her healing. What healing? Leo asked. Greta smiled. Greta smiled, and this time it showed everything. The hard line of her teeth, the faint scars left behind by whatever accident had shaped her face. The way she spoke made Leo's chest constrict all over again, tight and shallow like his lungs had forgotten their purpose. He descended the stairs slowly, never breaking eye contact. She watched him with quiet interest, unmoving. Until he reached the bottom. She didn't step aside. He had to turn his body and slide past her, close enough to feel her breath on his cheek. Peppermint strong, overpowering. Up close he noticed her eyes. The pupils were too large for the dim hallway, swallowing the color entirely. Dark and reflective, like deep water with no bottom. In Lucy's room he searched. The closet offered nothing new, rows of clothes arranged by color, the velvet dress still hanging at the back like a waiting sentence. The dresser drawers were immaculate, socks and underthings folded and sorted from bright white to dull gray. Perfect, controlled. The bottom drawer was heavier. Beneath a pile of sweaters Lucy had never worn, he found it. Her old Christmas stocking. The one their mother had stitched by hand, Lucy's name carefully sewn in red thread. Leo reached inside and pulled back quickly. Coal spilled into his palm, not the fake kind meant to be playful. Real coal, oily, gritty. It stained his fingers black. Wrapped beneath it in thin tissue paper lay a dead sparrow. Its neck was snapped, head bent at an angle that made bile rise in his throat. As he lifted it, two more small bodies slid free and hit the drawer with soft, terrible thuds. All broken, all carefully wrapped, preserved, not decayed. Footsteps creaked on the stairs. Leo shoved everything back where he'd found it, slammed the drawer shut, and turned just as Greta appeared in the doorway. Her head tilted slightly, as if she were listening to a sound only she could hear. "You're searching for explanations," she said calmly. Leo said nothing. "Your sister is extraordinary," Greta continued. "What happened to her changed things. Some children, when they come close to dying, return unguarded, sensitive, open." His stomach twisted. "Your father brought me here because I know how to handle that," she said. "I help close doors before something else notices they're open." "You're hurting her," Leo said, his voice barely steady. "I am protecting her." Her expression didn't shift, not anger, not fear. "You wouldn't understand," she went on softly. "You're unwell, Leonard. Your doctor warned us. Said you might misinterpret things, see threats where there are none, try to interfere." Numbness crept into his hands. "You talked to my doctor?" he asked. "Your father allowed it," Greta replied easily. "We needed to know what to expect, what precautions were necessary." She stepped into the room. Leo backed away until the window pressed cold against his spine. "The medication helps, doesn't it?" she said. "Keeps the worst thoughts quiet, but it also clouds you, makes you doubt your instincts. We agreed it was best you stay on it while you're here, for everyone's safety." She was close now, close enough that he could see her pupils finally shrink, adjusting to the pale daylight spilling through the glass. Normal. Human. That somehow terrified him more. "Your doctor mentioned you might accuse others," Greta continued gently. "Project your fear outward, confuse reality with imagination." She smiled again. "And that's exactly what you're doing now." She spoke as if she were explaining something simple, inevitable. Said it was natural for someone like him to shift blame outward. Said it happened all the time in situations like his. Her voice softened, wrapped in sympathy. The accident wasn't his fault, she assured him. None of it was, but Lucy was different now. Fragile, altered, and she required a level of care that ordinary people couldn't provide. Care only she understood. She told him his father already did. That one day Leo would as well. Then she walked away, leaving him by the window as her footsteps descended. Steady, identical, each step placed with the same careful pressure, as if the house itself were counting. Leo waited until the sounds faded back into the kitchen. Then he shut himself into his room and locked the door. The pill bottle sat on the nightstand exactly where he'd left it. He picked it up, turned it in his hands, read the instructions again, twice a day. As needed, he unscrewed the cap, poured the tablets into the toilet and flushed, watched them disappear in a white spiral. Within an hour, the shaking began. By evening, his jaw throbbed from clenching. His muscles ached, but his mind finally felt clean, sharp, awake. Dinner that night was cured meat, glazed and spiced, the sweetness ruined by that same burning mint flavor that clung to everything in the house. Greta arranged the serving dishes with perfect symmetry, 3 settings only. When Leo asked about Lucy, Greta didn't look up, said Lucy was conserving her strength, preparing. Christmas Eve was close now, 2 days away. Whatever was coming, it was coming soon. After the plates were cleared, Leo asked his father to speak with him alone. His father hesitated, glancing toward Greta as if awaiting permission. Then he followed Leo into the study. The door closed. Leo asked how much she was being paid. His father bristled, said money wasn't the point, said Leo needed to trust them. When Leo asked what kind of professional locked a child in an attic, his father's face flushed hot with anger and shame. He said Lucy was unwell, that something inside her had fractured, that Greta was the only one who knew how to repair it. Leo pressed harder, asked if his father had actually seen Lucy eat, asked if he ever checked on her himself, asked what really happened during those so-called sessions upstairs. His father's hands began to shake. He said Greta had credentials, said she worked with children like Lucy, survivors, that her methods were unconventional, yes, but necessary, that Leo was imagining things, that his doctor had warned this might happen. She told you I'd say this, Leo said quietly. She warned you I'd interfere. His father nodded, eyes wet, shoulders sagging. I don't know what's real anymore, he whispered. Your mother is gone. You were hospitalized for most of a year. Lucy won't speak to me. She won't eat unless Greta insists. She just disappears into herself. His voice cracked. I don't know how to save my family, he said. So if someone tells me they can help, if they sound certain, I listen. What else am I supposed to do? Leo had no answer. But upstairs, behind a locked door, time was running out. Leo left his father folded into himself and climbed the stairs, first to the second floor, then higher, moving softly, deliberately, as if the house were listening. At the attic door, he knocked once, whispered Lucy's name into the wood. Nothing answered. He reached for the handle anyway. He expected resistance, expected the lock. The handle turned. The door opened into darkness thick with scent, peppermint layered over something metallic and rotten. Cold, bloody. His fingers found the switch. The single bulb sputtered, flickered, then stayed on. The attic was bare. No boxes, no furniture, no sign a person had ever stayed there. Just exposed beams and raw floorboards. In the center of the space, a circle had been traced in white powder salt, he realized distantly. Inside it lay the green velvet dress, arranged carefully, flattened as if a body should have been inside it but wasn't. Around the circle, candy canes had been placed in a precise star, their sharpened ends pointing inward. And spread across the chest of the dress, tied neatly with red ribbon, was Lucy's hair. Leo's legs gave out. He collapsed onto the top stair, staring, forcing his mind to invent any explanation that didn't tear him apart. Maybe Greta had cut Lucy's hair. Maybe Lucy wasn't meant to be here yet. Maybe she was somewhere else in the house. Footsteps sounded below. Measured even. Greta. Leo lunged up, slammed the attic door shut, and ran. He barely made it back to his room before he heard her reach the landing. She paused outside the attic, then turned and walked away. She hadn't checked the door. She didn't need to. That night, Leo didn't sleep. He sat by the window as snow climbed higher against the walls, listening to the wind claw at the roof like it was trying to get in. At exactly 2 a.m, something moved in the backyard. A small shape, wrapped in white, child-sized. Leo pressed his face to the glass, breath fogging the pain. The figure stood perfectly still, head tipped upward, as if staring straight at his window. Lucy, he whispered. He was moving before fear could catch him, down the stairs, through the kitchen, fumbling with the back door. He burst outside barefoot, snow biting instantly through his thin clothes, freezing his lungs with every breath. He ran, calling her name. The figure didn't move. When he reached it, understanding hit him like a blow. It was Lucy. It was a snowman. Someone had dressed it carefully in Lucy's white nightgown, the one with lace at the collar. They'd wrapped her winter coat around its frozen body, and perched atop its head, brown against the snow, was what looked like Lucy's hair. Leo spun, searching the yard, heart hammering. No footprints, no movement. The house loomed behind him, every window dark except his own, glowing faintly where he'd left the light on. And in that silence, standing alone in the snow, Leo finally understood. Whatever Greta was preparing for Christmas, it was already underway. The snowman stared back at him. In the pale glow of the moon, filtered through tearing clouds, Leo saw the face someone had carved into it with blackened stone, two hollow eyes, a wide mouth pulled open in a silent scream. It wasn't playful. It wasn't a joke. It was a warning frozen in place. He couldn't feel his feet anymore, or his fingers. Even his ears had gone numb, like they'd been erased. Snow pressed against his legs up to the knees, heavy and unyielding. For a moment, he couldn't remember how he'd ended up outside, or why he believed running into a blizzard was the right thing to do. The back door burst open. Light spilled across the yard. His father stood there, panic carved deep into his face. Greta hovered just behind him, perfectly composed. Together, they pulled Leo back inside, wrapped him in blankets, sat him by the fire. Greta pressed a warm cup into his hands. The drink burned going down, too sweet, too sharp, peppermint again. He drank it anyway. His hands wouldn't stop shaking, and the cold had settled deep into his bones. His father kept repeating the same sentence, how close Leo had been to dying, how dangerous the cold was, how hypothermia didn't take long. Greta said nothing. She just watched him. When Leo glanced at her over the rim of the cup, she smiled. "You thought you saw something," she said softly, "didn't you?" His tongue felt thick, heavy. The room swayed when he tried to shift his weight. He attempted to stand and failed. "Your medication matters, Leonard," Greta continued, calm as ever. "Skipping doses can cause confusion, visions, fear." She gently removed the cup from his hands. "Your father and I talked about this," she said. "We worried you might stop taking it, so I've been making sure you still get what you need." His father was speaking, apologizing maybe, but Leo couldn't separate the words anymore. The walls bent inward, the ceiling felt too low, like the house was folding around him. "Don't resist," Greta whispered. "You need sleep. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve." Darkness swallowed him. Leo woke in his bed, with no memory of how he got there. Gray winter light seeped through the window. His mouth tasted metallic and sweet, peppermint and blood. When he pushed himself upright, his head felt stuffed with cotton, thoughts sluggish and distant. The house was silent. Too silent. He steadied himself and stepped into the hall. Lucy's bedroom door stood open. Inside, the green velvet dress hung from the closet door, but it was wrong. The proportions were wrong. It was no longer made for a child. It fit an adult frame now. The lace at the collar and sleeves was darkened, stained a deep, drying red. His mind tried to make sense of it and failed. He climbed to the attic. The door was unlocked. Inside, the circle was gone, scrubbed away, but faint white traces still clung to the floor. The candy canes had vanished. The dress was gone. Only Lucy's hair remained, curled in the corner like something shed or discarded. Downstairs, his father and Greta sat at the kitchen table, coffee steaming in their cups. They didn't look up when Leo entered. "Where is she?" he asked. His father stared into his mug, knuckles white. Greta set her cup down. The sound cracked through the room like breaking glass. "She's being ready," Greta said. "Tonight is the arrangement. I want to see her." Greta's eyes met his at last. "No." The word lingered in the air, heavy and final. And Leo understood with sick certainty that whatever Greta had planned for Christmas, it was no longer something he could stop. Leo searched his father's face, waiting for resistance, for anger, fear, anything that resembled protection. But his father didn't look up. He stared into his coffee like it held the answer to a question he no longer wanted to ask. "You can't stop me from seeing my sister," Leo said. Greta rose from her chair. She seemed taller standing, or maybe Leo felt smaller. Maybe the medication warped distances, bent proportions. Or maybe she had always been this imposing, and he was only noticing now. "I will do whatever is required to ensure tonight proceeds properly," Greta said calmly. "Your father has entrusted this home to me until the work is finished." She stepped closer. "If you interfere again, if you leave your room, attempt to escape, or disrupt what must happen, I will have you restrained." Her voice lowered, hardened. "Do you understand?" Leo did. He understood his father had surrendered, that Greta had claimed victory long before tonight, that Lucy was somewhere nearby, alone, frightened and slipping away, and that no one was coming to help her. So he went back to his room and locked the door. He searched until his hands closed around something solid, a screwdriver from the desk, a heavy metal bookend shaped like a horse frozen mid-rear, a small knife he'd been given years ago, meant for camping trips and birthdays, not this. He didn't have a plan. The fog made thinking difficult, but instinct remained sharp and urgent. He had to stop her. He had to save Lucy. At 7, Greta knocked. Her voice drifted through the door, warm and falsely caring. Dinner was ready. He needed to eat, she said. Strength mattered. Tomorrow would be difficult. She added, almost casually, that tomorrow they would bury his mother and his sister, and that he needed to be clear-headed for the funeral. Leo didn't respond. Her footsteps eventually retreated. At 8, the house went still. No voices, no movement, only the storm howling outside, refusing to loosen its grip. Leo opened his door. The hallway was dark. Downstairs, candlelight flickered weakly. The power had failed again. He crept forward, knife clenched in one hand, bookend heavy in the other, and descended the stairs. The living room no longer looked like a home. Every piece of furniture had been shoved against the walls. In the center stood a towering pine, its branches scraping the ceiling. It was drenched in red and white stripes, ribbons, sharp curves of candy hanging from every limb. At the base of the tree stood Lucy. She was wrapped in the green velvet dress, her feet bare, her arms stiff at her sides. Her eyes were open, staring straight ahead, unblinking. Leo ran to her, dropped to his knees, grabbed her shoulders. She was freezing. Her skin had gone bluish. Her lips were dark, nearly purple. "Lucy," he begged. "It's me. Look at me. We're leaving right now." She didn't react, didn't blink, didn't seem to recognize him at all. Footsteps sounded behind him. Leo spun, lifting the bookend, and saw Greta standing at the edge of the candlelight. She wore white, not festive, funereal. The fabric hung loose around her body like a shroud. Her hair fell freely past her shoulders, and in the trembling light, her shadow stretched tall and distorted along the wall. She smiled, and Leo knew, too late, that the arrangement was already complete. Her face twisted unnaturally, features sliding and shifting as though they couldn't settle where they belonged. Leo's chest tightened. "You can't save her, Leonard," Greta said, her voice low and echoing, layered with a strange resonance as if it came from far beneath the floorboards. "She's already gone. You did this. You poisoned her, starved her, locked her in the cold." "No, I did nothing," Leo shouted. Greta stepped closer, and Leo saw tears streaking her strange, shifting face. Real, impossibly human tears. "You did this 2 years ago. Black ice. You lost control. Your mother died instantly. Your sister, she froze in the back seat while you lay unconscious behind the wheel. By the time help arrived, she'd been gone for 40 minutes. Leo's hands trembled violently. The heavy bookend slipped from his fingers, striking the floor with a crack that echoed like gunfire. "No, she's here. She's dead, Leonard. Dead for 2 years, Greta said, the sound of her voice now warped, deep and hollow, as if carried from the bottom of a well. "But that doesn't mean she's gone," she continued, stepping beside the chair where Leo imagined Lucy sitting. "Some children, when they die in fear and cold, calling for someone who doesn't answer, they don't always leave. They latch onto the living. Your grief opened a door, Leonard. Your guilt, it became a beacon, and she came back through you." Greta's hand moved through the empty space where Lucy's shoulder should have been, and Leo saw it, the faintest flinch, a shiver, a pulse of recognition. "I'm not a stepmother. I specialize in cases like yours, traumatic loss, persistent manifestations. Your father hired me because I understand what happens when the dead refuse to stay buried. The Christmas arrangement isn't a sacrifice, it's a closing, a way to seal the door you opened and help your sister pass on." Her eyes swept the empty armchair. Fear crept into her expression. "But you fought me at every turn," she said, voice trembling now. "Sabotaged every ritual. And now I'm not sure we can close it at all." Leo forced himself to really look at Lucy. Candlelight flickered across the room. He could see the armchair beneath her, the throw pillow that should have supported her body. And yet, he could see through her. "No, you're lying. You're the monster," he yelled. His father appeared in the doorway, pale, wide-eyed. Not pity, but terror etched into every line of his face. Greta whispered almost to herself, "It's too late." The temperature dropped suddenly, sharply, like winter had been ripped open and poured into the room. Leo's breath billowed in front of him in white clouds. The candles bent violently, all leaning toward the empty armchair as if pulled by an unseen force. Greta's face drained of color. The threshold tonight, midnight on Christmas Eve. If she doesn't pass through willingly, she'll... Leo's voice cut through the cold, steady and clear, stronger than it had been in hours. "She will not. I will not let you take her. Not tonight, not ever." And in that instant, the room seemed to hold its breath. The wind howled outside, snow rattled against the windows, and the faint, icy pulse of something unnatural waited for his next move. Talk to her." The words fell out of him, thin and hollow. I thought if I kept her warm, she wouldn't be alone." The room seemed to contract around that confession. Greta lowered her hand slowly. Her voice, when she spoke again, was softer, older somehow, weighted with something like regret. "You weren't wrong about one thing, Leonard. She was cold, and she was alone, but not out there, not in the snow." The candles flickered violently. Frost spider webbed across the inside of the windows, racing outward as if chased by an unseen breath. "You built the snowman because part of you remembered," Greta said. Your mind couldn't hold the truth directly, so it gave you something else. A shape, a place to put her. Leo shook his head, tears blurring his vision. I saw her move. I heard her. You heard yourself, Greta replied gently. And you felt her because she's been anchored to you, not haunting you, not hunting you, just waiting. The mirror on the mantel began to fall, clouding from the center outward. Leo watched, frozen, as a small handprint slowly appeared on the glass from the inside. His father let out a broken sound, half prayer, half song. Greta's composure finally cracked. Leonard, listen to me. Tonight is the last night. The boundary is thin enough. I can't force her through. I never could. That's why it had to be perfect. Quiet, safe, familiar. Christmas isn't about blood or demons. She swallowed hard. It's about home. The temperature dropped again. Not sharp this time. Intentional. The candles extinguished one by one, plunging the room into darkness lit only by moonlight reflecting off the snow outside. From the empty armchair came a sound. A breath. Leo felt it before he heard it. The pressure in his chest, the ache behind his eyes, the memory of a small hand slipping into his while crossing the street. Leo. His knees gave out. He crawled forward, sobbing openly now. Lucy, I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have. I know, the voice whispered closer now. I waited, but you were sleeping. The mirror shattered. Not outward, inward, collapsing into itself with a sound like ice breaking on a lake. Wind roared through the room, carrying the scent of snow and pine and something older, colder. Greta knelt beside Leo. Tell her the truth, she said, tears freezing on her lashes. Not the version that keeps her here, the one that lets her go. Leo pressed his forehead to the floor. His voice broke, but he didn't stop. I crashed the car. I was scared. I drove too fast. I didn't wake up. I didn't save you. And I will live with that for the rest of my life. But you don't have to stay with me anymore. Silence. Then warmth, just a little, spread through the room. I'm tired, Lucy said softly. I know, Leo whispered. You can rest now. The cold released its grip all at once. The frost melted. The wind died. Somewhere deep in the house, a clock chimed midnight. The armchair was empty. Truly empty. Greta exhaled a long, shuddering breath. Leo's father collapsed beside him, arms wrapped around his son, grounding him, anchoring him to the living. Outside in the backyard, the snowman slumped gently, collapsing under its own weight as dawn began to bleed into the horizon. Christmas morning came quiet, and for the first time in 2 years, Leo woke up alone, but not haunted. Her, Leo finished weakly. I put her clothes on a pile of snow and begged it to breathe. His father nodded, tears streaking down into his beard. I saw you. You were kneeling there like it was a body, like if you said the right words, she'd wake up. Leo turned to Greta, dread pooling in his stomach. And the attic, the recordings, that was just me. Greta didn't answer right away. Her fingers shook as she pointed toward the armchair. Most of it was you, your voice, your grief. But there was something else on that tape. Another sound, very faint, she swallowed. A child answering you. The world seemed to slide sideways. Or maybe Leo was the one collapsing inward, layers of numbness peeling away as the medication finally loosened its grip. He saw the room clearly now. His father crumpled on the floor, a broken man. Greta standing rigid by the fire, trained calm, barely holding. And the space where Lucy should have been empty, undeniably empty. The funeral is tomorrow, Greta said quietly. At noon, We waited 2 years. We wanted you strong enough to face it, to say goodbye. Leo shut his eyes. When he opened them again, nothing had changed. No girl, no green dress, just absence. Tell me the truth, he said hoarsely. All of it, don't soften it, not this time. His father drew a ragged breath. You lived. Your mother and your sister didn't. You drove too fast. The car hit black ice and went into the ditch. You were out cold. By the time help came, they were already gone. Lucy had been gone for a long time. Each word landed like a blow. You spent 8 months in a hospital, his father continued. When they released you last week, we thought bringing you home might help. Christmas, familiar walls, closure. His voice broke. But you kept seeing her, everywhere. And I warned him, Greta said. Her gaze never left the empty chair. Grief like this doesn't always stay inside the mind. Sometimes it opens something. Most people feel it as guilt or obsession. But in rare cases, violent deaths, children, extreme cold, that opening becomes something else. A doorway, Leah whispered. A threshold, Greta corrected softly. Not enough for the dead to return fully, but enough for them to linger, to be felt, to be heard. She looked at him then, and there was no cruelty in her eyes, only respect. I wasn't trying to erase Lucy. I was trying to help her leave. And the rituals. Guides, Greta said. Comforts. Ways to convince her she wasn't being abandoned again. Her jaw tight. But every time I got close, you stopped it. You couldn't let go, and she followed your lead. Leo's chest ached like it was caving in. So what happens now? Greta exhaled slowly. At midnight, the threshold closes. Whatever hasn't crossed by then, she hesitated just a fraction, stays, but not gently, not as a memory. The house creaked around them, wood contracting as the cold pressed in once more. Leo stared at the empty chair, understanding settling over him at last, not as a vision, not as a voice, but as a truth he could no longer outrun. She's waiting, he said. Greta nodded, and this time, Leonard, she needs you to let her go. Christmas night pressed in around them, heavy and final. The line between breathing and buried was closing, sealing itself the way it always did, year after year. If she's still here when it shuts, Greta said quietly, her fingers tightening at her throat, if she's still bound to you, I don't know what happens. For the first time, fear cracked her composure. Most spirits fade when they can't cross, but Lucy is different. Your guilt feeds her, anchors her. A candle died, then another. No breeze, no draft, just darkness spreading. She might what? Leo whispered. His father answered, voice hollow. She might take you with her, that's what Greta believes. Your heart could give out, or your mind. The doctors would call it trauma. He swallowed. But really, it would be Lucy pulling you through because you're all she has left. Cold crept up from the floor into Leo's legs, into his chest. The candles kept going out, one by one, and the room felt wrong, like winter itself was moving through it, unseen but undeniable. Then let her, Leo said softly. Let her take me, I deserve it. No, his father's voice cut sharp through the cold. You don't get that escape. You live, that's the sentence. We both do. Living with it, that's the punishment. In the mirror above the mantel, Leo saw everything reflected back at him. The tree bent with frost, his father shaking, Greta rigid with focus. The armchair stood empty until, for a heartbeat, it was. Something shimmered there, a suggestion of green, a child-sized shape, or maybe just shadow and candlelight playing tricks. I'm sorry, Leo said, voice breaking as he faced the chair, the mirror, the space where his sister might be. I'm so sorry, Lucy, for all of it, for driving too fast, for not waking up, for leaving you alone in the cold, for keeping you here because I was too weak to say goodbye. The air dropped further. Frost bloomed across the glass, crept along ornaments, glazed the mirror's edge. "That's it," Greta murmured. "Don't stop. She needs to hear that you know." "I know," Leo said, each word tearing through him. "You're dead. Saying it hurts, but it's the truth. You died. Mom died, and it was my fault." His breath shook. "I know you were scared. I know you were waiting for me to admit it. So here it is. I'm admitting it." The final candle trembled, flame bending but refusing to die. "I can't keep seeing you everywhere," Leo went on. "It's destroying Dad. It's destroying me. And maybe it's hurting you too, keeping you trapped between here and whatever comes next." His voice collapsed into a whisper. "So I'm letting you go. You don't have to stay for me anymore. You don't have to wait." The flame steadied. The cold paused, as if the house itself were listening. And for the first time since the crash, since the snow and the silence and the waiting, the room felt like it exhaled. The words fell out of him like surrender, like confession finally finished. After that, there was nothing left to say. The house answered with silence, but not the empty kind. This silence had mass. It pressed against the walls, settled into the corners. Then from the space where the chair sat vacant came a sound, not speech, not breath, something softer, a release, like air escaping a long-sealed room. The cold loosened its grip. Not all at once. It retreated slowly, inch by inch, the way winter does when it realizes it's no longer welcome. Frost faded from the glass. The air stopped biting. The final candle straightened, its flame no longer trembling. Greta exhaled shakily, as if she'd been holding her lungs hostage for hours. "It worked," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "She's gone. I can still feel the threshold. It's open a little longer, but she isn't here anymore." Leo's father reached for him, steadying him as Leo's knees nearly buckled. His touch was careful, reverent. His face was streaked with tears that had finally found permission to fall. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we lay them to rest, properly, together." Leo nodded. His throat wouldn't cooperate. They moved as one toward the doorway, Greta gathering her pale dress around herself like protective armor, his father's hand firm on Leo's shoulder. Before stepping out, Leo turned back. The room looked ordinary now. The chair was just a chair. The tree stood tall, heavy with red and white, its ornaments catching the dying light. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. It looked finished, closed. He turned to leave, and then the mirror caught his eye. In the reflection above the mantel, the room appeared the same, but the chair was different. Draped over its headrest was something long and dark and unmistakably familiar. Brown strands, coiled loosely, as if just placed there. Lucy's hair. His heart stuttered. He blinked. The reflection corrected itself. The chair was empty, bare. "Come on," his father said softly, guiding him away before Leo could speak. They climbed the stairs in silence while murmured plans followed behind. About rest, about medication, about the funeral waiting for them in daylight. In his room, Leo sat on the edge of the bed and stared at his hands as though they belonged to someone else. After a long while, he opened his right palm. A single strand of brown hair lay, pressed into the center of it. Real, tangible, impossible. His fingers curled around it slowly, carefully, as if it might disappear if handled too roughly. Tomorrow they would bury the dead. Tonight he held this one defiance of reason and tried to decide what it meant. Maybe his sister had crossed over. Maybe the rituals had done what Greta believed they could. Maybe boundaries truly sealed at midnight. Or maybe some doors, once opened, never fully closed. Outside, snow continued to fall, quiet and relentless. Inside, Leo sat in the dark, Lucy's hair warm against his skin, like a secret, like a warning, like proof of something he would spend the rest of his life trying to understand. Downstairs, Greta's footsteps moved slowly through the house, measured and deliberate, as if she too was listening for something that might not be gone after all. She moved through the rooms below, her steps slow and deliberate, extinguishing what little light remained. Each candle died with a soft hiss until the house surrendered fully to darkness. That was when Leo heard it. Not clearly, not close. A sound so faint it might have been imagined, thin, uneven breaths rushed and fragile. The kind of breathing creatures make when they're cornered when panic has nowhere to go. It drifted through the walls, distant and wrong. Leo opened his hand. His palm was empty. The strand of hair was gone. He shut his eyes, heart pounding, and waited for sleep that refused to come. Morning would force answers. Morning would bring earth and coffins and final words spoken over graves. He would have to decide then, what was memory, what was madness, what was sorrow wearing a disguise, and whether any line truly separated grief from something far darker. But not tonight. Tonight the house smelled faintly of mint and cold wood. Tonight his father's hope lay shattered somewhere downstairs. Tonight Leo lay in the bed he'd grown up in, staring into the dark, listening to the wind rake against the walls, to the old house settling into itself. And to the breathing. Fast, uneven. Maybe it was his own. Maybe it was. Story 2, The Hearts in Jars. The northwest corner of the medical school's third floor was a place sunlight never touched. Even at the height of day, shadows lingered here like old ghosts. But on that fog-choked evening in November 1887, darkness had taken full possession. Mist clung to the grimy window panes, pressing as if it wanted to crawl inside. Only a distant street lamp cast a weak, amber smear across the dust-covered glass, struggling to illuminate the secrets within. 4 students crept through the hallway, hearts hammering. Caldwell, Parsons, Young, and the youngest, Ashford. The lock gave way under their hands almost too easily, a fact that should have made them hesitate. But curiosity and desperation drowned caution. The door sighed open like a held breath, revealing the professor's study. They had come for something forbidden, the examination papers, already prepared and marked a full week in advance, waiting in the dark corners of Professor Whitlock's oak desk. Caldwell, insisting on the role of leader despite the tremor in his hands, opened a lantern. Its feeble glow fell across the room, revealing walls lined with heavy tomes, volumes of medicine in Latin and German, leather spines cracked with age. Parsons lingered beside him, still smirking from mocking spiritualists the night before, confident in his disbelief. Young shifted uneasily, second-guessing every step, already sensing the wrongness of this intrusion. Ashford remained silent, eyes scanning, absorbing, unnervingly still. The desk, a dark slab of polished oak, appeared innocent at first glance, save for the inkwell and a peculiar paperweight that seemed alive. It moved ever so slightly when no one looked directly at it, a subtle pulse of intention. And then the jars revealed themselves. Glass cylinders filled with liquid that shimmered in the lantern light, each containing a heart. The sight was enough to freeze the blood. Caldwell's bravado faltered as the closest heart twitched, a small, impossible contraction, faint yet undeniable. The room seemed to exhale around them, walls stretching, shadows elongating like living things. The air carried a faint metallic tang, the scent of something preserved, something forbidden. Ashford's voice cut through the thickening tension. We shouldn't be here. But the door had already locked itself behind them, sealing their fate. Fear became tangible, wrapping around their throats, clawing at their lungs. The paperweight shifted again, this time unmistakably, as if beckoning or warning them away. The lantern flickered violently, shadows spinning and twisting, and for the first time they realized the study was no longer a sanctuary of learning. It had become a chamber of suspended life, a cathedral of hearts that refused to rest, watching, waiting, measuring their trespass. Outside, the fog pressed harder, a silent accomplice to the room's dark purpose. Inside, every breath felt heavier, every heartbeat echoing against the unseen rhythm of the preserved hearts. Some doors, once opened, never close quietly, and some hearts, once stirred, demand that the living pay witness to what they have awakened. In that suffocating darkness, the students understood. The study was not just a room. It was a threshold, a place where curiosity could become horror and knowledge could bleed into obsession. And tonight, they were the intruders who had crossed the line. The eastern wall held their attention like a siren. Young, the smallest among them, let out a sound that teetered between a gasp and a whimper. Shelves lined the wall, rigid and orderly, and upon them sat jars, perhaps 20 each, catching the lantern light and gleaming wetly as if aware of their watchers. Caldwell lifted the lantern higher, and the contents crystallized into a horrifying clarity. Human hearts, suspended in a yellow, viscous fluid, each floating like a specimen preserved for eternity. Labels penned in Whitlock's meticulous script adorned each jar, but these were no sterile anatomical notes. Names, dates, even roles and fates were etched in the careful hand of the professor. The closest read, "The Heart of Josiah Croft, foreman, lost to his own hand, 1881. Parsons, normally unshakable, traced his finger along the labels, whispering them aloud, the sound echoing oddly in the confined space. The Heart of Victoria Sloane, artist's model, encased in her final performance, 1883. A sudden chill brushed Caldwell's spine. The fog outside had thickened into a wall of white, pressing against the panes, and the room seemed to grow colder with each revelation. He shook the thought off, forcing his mind back to their mission. Desk drawers yielded only mundane correspondence and journals, the papers they sought absent. It was Ashford, small and methodical, who found it, a hidden compartment behind the false backing of the medical volumes. His triumphant whisper froze on his lips. Inside lay not examination papers, but 2 thick leather-bound tomes, each the size of a clenched fist. The first read simply, Case Studies in Cardiac Preservation, Volume 1. Caldwell's instincts screamed at him to leave, but curiosity, or something darker, drove him to open it. The handwriting was unmistakably Whitlock, though younger, less disciplined. Dated entries stretched back to 1879, each meticulously detailing the hearts that sat before them. But this was not science alone. Each passage read like a story, an intimate account of the person behind the organ, recorded with unsettling psychological depth. It was narrative, obsession, and ritual intertwined. Caldwell's gaze fell on the entry for Josiah Croft, drawn in as if by invisible hands. The words seemed to reach for him, demanding to be consumed. The phantom limb from the journal of Professor Edmund Whitlock. The case of Josiah Croft presents certain features of interest to the student of psychosomatic phenomena. Even as he read, a slow realization settled like ice in his chest. These were more than preserved hearts. They were remnants of lives studied, cataloged, and in some way haunted. And the study, cloaked in fog and shadow, had already claimed their attention. Whatever door they had opened, They could not simply step back through it. I will admit this now, with the benefit of distance and dread. Nothing I believed at the beginning could explain how it ended. For over a decade, Josiah Croft ruled the mill floor with a clenched jaw and colder heart. Men who worked beneath him spoke later in hushed voices, as if cruelty itself might still be listening. He punished imagined mistakes, shaved coins from pay packets for sport, and sent disliked workers toward machines known to maim. When a boy lost fingers to a grinding press, Croft's response was not shock or sorrow, but irritation, as though the injury were an inconvenience to production. Factories in those years were unforgiving beasts. Steel did not care who deserved mercy, and on a gray Tuesday morning in early spring, the machines turned their indifference on the man who had wielded them so mercilessly. Croft's coat snagged first, then fabric tightened, then bone followed cloth into the press. The force was violent enough to splinter his arm before anyone could shut the machine down. The mill's physician, unsteady hands, sour breath, did what little he could, but rot bloomed fast beneath the skin. By the second day, the limb was lost. The operation took place at home, on a kitchen table scrubbed too late to matter. His wife held the light. A relative held him still. The saw worked through flesh and bone a hand's length below the shoulder. Croft made no sound, only bit down hard and stared, eyes burning with something sharper than agony. The arm was buried behind the house, wrapped and forgotten, as custom dictated. That night sensation returned. At first it was ordinary in the way textbooks predict, a ghostly tingle, the illusion of fingers curling where nothing remained. Most amputees speak of this, the mind clinging to old maps of the body. But Croft's sensations did not fade. They evolved. He felt pressure, then movement, then resistance. His missing hand, he claimed, no longer rested where it once had. It wandered, it clenched, it reached. Abigail listened in silence as she always had. Years of marriage had taught her that speaking only invited punishment, but even she noticed the change. Croft began waking in a sweat, swatting at empty air, insisting his absent fingers were digging into soil, scraping against stone, clawing upward from somewhere cold and cramped. He said the arm was not lost. He said it was trying to come back. And each night, the sensation crept higher, past the elbow that no longer existed, toward the shoulder that still did, until Croft began to wonder, aloud and terrified, whether the body remembers more than the mind allows, or whether what we bury ever truly stays buried. They said it started with his sleep. Those closest to him claimed he would jolt awake in the dark, reaching for a hand that was no longer there, whispering about crawling sensations that refused to settle. At first, it was only the familiar buzzing, sharp, prickling echoes where fingers used to be. But on the fourth night after the amputation, something changed. The missing hand did not drift or tingle. It snapped shut. Croft later described it as sudden and brutal, not the slow curling of imagined fingers, but a violent grip, as if something had been seized in panic or fury. The sensation locked in place, holding tight for nearly an hour before loosening its hold, slowly and unwillingly, like a fist forced open. The doctor dismissed it. A dose was written, reassurance offered. Everything the book said pointed toward improvement with time. Time did the opposite. Within days, the phantom limb began acting on its own. Croft could feel it tapping against nothing in the middle of the night, drumming impatiently as if waiting for a response. Sometimes the wrist turned, rotating carefully like a hand studying an object from every side. Worst of all was the dirt, the unmistakable feeling of grit beneath nails that did not exist. He swore he could smell soil, damp and cold, clinging to fingers buried somewhere far away. His wife stopped sleeping beside him. The second week brought terror. Croft awoke choking, both hands, one real, one unseen, clutched around his throat. He could feel every finger. The pressure was deliberate, measured, not the chaos of a nightmare, but the calculated squeeze of intent. It lasted only moments, yet left him drenched in sweat, trembling long after the sensation faded. The doctor found nothing wrong. The wound was clean, healing well, no infection, no damage that could explain what Croft felt. The dosage was increased, trauma was blamed, imagination accused. Night after night, the hand returned. Each time it lingered longer. Each time it released him with greater reluctance. Croft began wrapping scarves tightly around his neck before bed, even as he admitted the futility of it. How do you defend yourself from something no one else can see? By the third week, he stopped lying down altogether. From dusk until dawn, he sat rigid in a chair, flinching at every sound, his remaining hand hovering at his throat like a shield that could never be lowered. People noticed. Whispers spread through the neighborhood. Few pitied him. Most believed his mind was finally breaking under the weight of his past. They said the memory of injured workers had followed him home. That guilt, long ignored, had found a voice at last. But Croft insisted this was no punishment of conscience. He said the hand was real, and it was learning. He stopped blaming guilt. Croft arrived at a darker certainty, one that settled into him with the same cold weight as the nights without sleep. He began telling anyone who would endure his rambling that the arm had never truly perished. He said it still lived beneath the garden, nourished by soil and rain, growing stronger while the rest of him unraveled. In the small hours when the house lay still, he swore he could sense it moving, scraping through dirt, dragging itself closer, inch by inch, toward the walls of the home. They tried to correct him. Flesh rots. Limbs do not wander. Pain invents stories when the mind is pushed too far. But Croft no longer cared for logic or comfort. What he felt each night was undeniable. The grip at his throat no longer felt like memory or illusion. It felt cold, dense, present. By the 21st night, he made his choice. If the thing beneath the earth refused to rest, he would destroy it. Fire would finish what steel had begun. He waited until his wife withdrew to the front room, then took a lantern and a spade from the shed. The garden lay behind the house, small and orderly, the soil dark from recent rain. He remembered the spot perfectly, measured it in steps, counted the distance like a ritual. Then he began to dig. Each thrust of the spade sent shadows leaping across the wall. Sweat soaked his collar. His lone arm burned with effort, unused to such work, but he did not slow. His focus sharpened into something fierce and unyielding. This would end tonight. The blade struck cloth. His breath broke as he dropped to his knees, scraping away earth with frantic hands until the wrapped bundle lay exposed. He tore at the canvas, ripping it open, and found nothing. No bone, no decay, no trace of what he had buried. Only an empty shroud and a smell that turned his stomach damp and sour, like ground disturbed too recently. That was when the hand closed around his throat. Not as a sensation, not as a phantom. As weight, as pressure. When Croft grabbed for it with his remaining hand, his fingers met resistance. Skin, cold and unyielding. Fingers locked tight around his windpipe, stronger than any grip he had known. He stumbled backward, nails raking his own neck as he fought to tear it free, but one hand was not enough. The lantern fell. The last thing the neighbors heard was the sound of something dragging through the garden soil, and a man choking on air that would not come. No man can fight 5 fingers when those fingers belong to something that has been buried, fed by soil and fury, and whatever stubborn spark refuses to die when a body is cut apart. Croft reached the kitchen doorway before his strength failed him. His knees buckled. He collapsed across the threshold, clawing at his own neck, eyes wide with a terror that had finally found a shape. His wife discovered him at first light. The verdict was tidy: an accident, exhaustion medicine, a seizure brought on by weeks without sleep, a tragedy but an understandable one, the sort of ending people could accept and then forget. Abigail did not forget. She had been awake when it happened, sitting alone in the parlor, listening to the house settle, counting her own breaths. She heard his choking gasp. She heard the struggle. And after it ended, after the house went still, she heard something else. A slow, deliberate sound, like flesh being dragged across wood. She stayed frozen in her chair as the noise crossed the kitchen. She heard the faint click of the back door easing shut. Only when dawn filled the windows did she gather the courage to move. The kitchen was empty save for her husband's body. The door to the garden stood open just enough to let in cold air, and in the thin layer of dust on the floor, stretching from Croft's throat to the doorway, were marks, 4 narrow lines evenly spaced, the width of fingers. Abigail never told anyone. The next day, she paid 2 men to fill the hole in the garden. She told them to dig deep, to press the earth hard, and to plant roses over it. They did exactly as instructed. The roses never bloomed. That patch of soil refused all growth, no matter the season. And on nights when the air lay perfectly still, Abigail would wake to a faint scratching sound, not at the doors, not at the windows, but from beneath the floor, as if something below was trying to remember which way led back to the light. Whitlock's journal did not dwell on sentiment. He wrote of acquiring the heart through professional channels, of preserving it with care. He noted unusual qualities in the tissue, a stiffness unlike any he had encountered, muscle fibers torn as though the organ had clenched itself apart in its final moments. Evidence, he suggested, of extraordinary strain at the instant of death. Most curious, more curious still, he added, was Abigail Croft's visit to his laboratory 3 months later. Caldwell's hands trembled as he turned the page. Before he could read further, a sharp voice shattered the silence. Young had stepped back from the shelves, his composure finally breaking. His eyes were locked on another glass vessel. Another heart. Another name. And the story waiting inside it was already watching them read. The year etched onto the label read 1883. Parsons lifted the second leather-bound book, his complexion drained of color beneath the lantern's glow. His fingers hesitated before opening it, as if the pages themselves might resist. When he began to read, his voice barely carried, thin and unsteady, as though the room were swallowing his words. Whitlock called this account a lesson in fixation, an examination of how devotion to beauty can rot into madness. Not a clinical record, he insisted, but a slow collapse of reason observed step by step. The subject was a sculptor named Augustus Sinclair. In his early years, Sinclair showed promise, but nothing extraordinary. He shaped respectable likenesses for paying clients, faces stiff with propriety, figures frozen in polite grief. Those who knew him said his skill exceeded his imagination. He believed greatness awaited him, yet he lacked the spark to reach it. He was competent, comfortable, and quietly bitter. Everything changed the autumn Victoria Sloane entered his studio. She arrived through a referral, another artist too busy to take her on. By most measures, she was ordinary, not striking, not forgettable, a face that blended easily into a crowd. She sewed garments by daylight and posed by night, as many young women did to survive. When Sinclair was commissioned to carve a memorial bust for a merchant's late wife, someone decided Victoria resembled the deceased just enough to serve as a reference. Their first meeting passed without incident. Victoria posed. Sinclair measured, sketched, and noted proportions. She held still with the practiced patience of someone who knew the value of not moving. The second sitting shifted everything. Sinclair asked her to smile. She tried. Her mouth lifted, her eyes softened. The expression formed exactly as expected. Sinclair froze. He raised his hand sharply, stopping her mid-expression. No, that wasn't it. He didn't accuse her of poor effort. He said the smile lacked truth. The mechanics were there, but something essential was missing. An unnamed quality he couldn't define, but felt certain he could recognize if he saw it. Victoria adjusted, tried again, and again. Each attempt was rejected. Sinclair grew animated, packing, muttering about angles and tension, about emotion leaking through muscle and bone. He asked her to hold the smile longer. Minutes passed. Her face began to tremble. He corrected her posture, her jaw, the tilt of her head, guiding her as though shaping clay that resisted his hands. By the end of the session, Victoria's cheeks ached and her lips burned. Sinclair, meanwhile, was exhilarated. He spoke of breakthroughs, of nearing something pure. From that day on, the sittings lengthened. He demanded stillness beyond endurance. Hours passed with her frozen in expressions no living face could maintain. When her muscles failed, he scolded her, not cruelly at first, but with mounting frustration. Perfection, he insisted, required sacrifice. Great art always did. Victoria returned because she needed the money, because he paid more each week, because she told herself it would end once the bust was complete. It didn't. Sinclair abandoned the commission. The dead woman no longer interested him. He was chasing something else now, something he believed Victoria carried inside her face. A moment of absolute expression, unmarred by motion or time. He began restraining her. Gently at first, a brace behind the neck, supports at the shoulders. He claimed it was for precision, for accuracy. She protested once, then less, then not at all. Neighbors heard nothing. The studio door stayed closed. Sinclair stopped accepting visitors. When he finally unveiled his work weeks later, those who saw it felt an unease they couldn't name. The statue was flawless. Too flawless. The expression, half smile, half stillness, seemed impossibly alive, as though it might shift if you looked away too long. Victoria Sloane was never seen again. Whitlock's notes ended not with speculation, but with fact. He recorded the retrieval of her heart following the discovery. He described its preservation. He mentioned, almost casually, how rigid it had been, how perfectly fixed in contraction, as if it had never learned how to relax. Parsons stopped reading. The silence pressed in again, and somewhere among the shelves, the jars caught the lantern light gleaming softly, as if listening. Sinclair needed something he couldn't name. He said it wasn't technique, not anatomy, not symmetry. It was an essence, something alive behind the muscles. A truth that flickered and vanished before language could trap it. Victoria tried to give it to him. She adjusted her mouth by fractions, softened her eyes, lifted one corner of her lips, then both. She smiled with restraint, then warmth, then exhaustion. Nothing pleased him. Each attempt earned a sharper correction, a more frustrated shake of his head. By the end of their second meeting, Sinclair's floor was littered with ruined sketches. Her face filled every page, scratched out, redrawn, attacked with frantic lines as if violence might force the truth to appear. Victoria did not return. Life moved on without her. Sinclair finished the memorial commission using measurements and memory. The client was satisfied. Money exchanged hands. The door closed, and Sinclair was left alone with 3 sketchbooks full of a face that was almost right. He told himself he should destroy them. Instead, he locked the studio door and began again. Clay rose beneath his fingers, shaped by obsession rather than patience. The likeness came easily, too easily, but the expression, always the expression, remained hollow. The eyes stared. The smile meant nothing. After 2 days, he smashed the sculpture to pieces. Then he tried again. And again. Weeks passed. Visitors who ventured inside his studio later described it as a shrine gone wrong. Faces everywhere, on tables, on shelves, leaning against walls. Dozens of versions of the same woman, each frozen mid-attempt, each closer than the last but never enough. The air smelled of wet clay and sleeplessness. Sinclair barely noticed anyone else. He spoke only of the look he chased. He described it with trembling precision. Not happiness, not joy, but the quiet certainty of someone holding a beautiful secret. Peace, touched by something private. When asked why it mattered so much, he bristled. This was the difference between skill and greatness, he said, between being remembered and being nothing. He had seen it once. Just once. During their first sitting, Victoria had turned her head toward the window. For a heartbeat, she forgot she was being watched. Her face softened into something real. That moment burned itself into his mind. He knew then what perfection looked like. And he would have it. He hired men to find her. They searched boarding houses, workshops, alleys where models gathered for work. Victoria Sloan had vanished. Her room stood empty. Her employer had heard nothing. Weeks turned to months. Sinclair waited. When she finally returned, it was on his terms. The final sculpture was unveiled in silence. Those who saw it later struggled to explain the discomfort it caused. The expression was flawless, too flawless. It felt aware, watching, as though it had been taken, not made. Victoria Sloan was never reported missing. Professor Whitlock's notes ended with practical observations. The heart, once removed, showed unusual rigidity. Muscles locked tight, as if seized by an emotion that never released. Preserved perfectly, encased like a truth too terrible to forget. Parsons stopped reading. The lantern trembled. Around them, the jars glimmered faintly on the shelves, quiet, patient, and waiting for the next story to be told. London swallowed people every day. A woman could erase herself without leaving so much as a ripple. When Sinclair learned that no one knew where Victoria had gone, he told himself this was proof she was still out there somewhere, intact, waiting. Until she returned, memory would have to suffice. He stopped working by daylight. Time dissolved. He sculpted until his hands split and bled, slept only when his body collapsed, ate only when dizziness forced him to the floor. Faces multiplied around him, rows of nearly right attempts, each carrying the same flaw, the same maddening absence. The room filled with her, but she never arrived. That was when the sound began. Not speech, not quite, more like breathing trapped inside mud. Sinclair wrote of it once, in a letter that survived when so much else did not. He claimed the clay had learned his rhythm, that as he pressed and shaped, it answered. A damp exhale, a low murmur rising from within the sculpted forms themselves, as if something inside them shifted when his hands withdrew. A colleague urged rest, travel, a physician. Sinclair never replied. When weeks passed without word, the colleague came himself. The studio door did not open. The owner was summoned. A key was produced, and the lock turned with a sound too loud for the quiet hall. At first, the room seemed empty. No man stood inside. No body lay on the floor. Only the sculptures. They ringed the walls now, arranged deliberately, facing inward like witnesses gathered for judgment. And something had changed. The early works, awkward, tense, were gone or pushed aside. These new pieces were different, impossible. The skill on display exceeded anything Sinclair had ever shown. The faces were exact, not approximations, not interpretations, exact. Skin appeared warm, eyes reflected light, lips seemed moments from parting. And the expression, at last, was right. Not joy, not contentment, something quieter, a knowing calm, the look of someone who understands what the observer does not. That was when the smell reached them. It hid beneath the clay and plaster, faint but undeniable, sweet, thick, organic, the kind of scent that clung to the back of the throat and refused to leave. The smell of something once living, now changed. They found Sinclair behind the central figure. What remained of him? The investigation would take months. Explanations would be attempted. None would satisfy. But everyone who entered that studio agreed on one thing. The finest sculpture stood at the center, elevated slightly above the rest. It was the only one signed. And pressed into its base, faint but unmistakable, were the impressions of human hands, 5 fingers on each side, embedded as if the clay had been warm when they were placed there, as if it had welcomed them. The stench grew stronger as they stepped inside, thick and sweet, the kind of smell that clings to memory long after it leaves the air. It reminded one officer of the butcher stalls near the river, meat left too long, warmth trapped where it shouldn't be. They found Sinclair in a narrow storage room barely wide enough to stand in. He sat on the floor, knees drawn up, back pressed to the wall like a child hiding from punishment. His hands were held out in front of him, palms up, as if he didn't recognize them anymore. Clay coated his skin past the elbows. It crusted his clothes, tangled in his hair, packed into his beard. He did not fight. As they lifted him to his feet, he spoke for the first time, voice cracked and raw, scraped thin by days without use. He repeated the same sentence again and again, softly, urgently, like a prayer he was afraid to forget. It needed moisture. It couldn't speak without it. In the center of the studio stood the largest piece, hidden beneath a heavy cloth. When the fabric was pulled away, several men turned aside and vomited. The figure beneath was flawless. A woman stood there, captured mid-gesture. One hand raised slightly as if making a point in conversation. Her head was turned, eyes focused on someone just out of sight. Her expression was everything Sinclair had chased, serene, knowing, touched with a private calm that felt unbearably intimate. Every detail was exact. Individual hairs, tiny creases at the eyes, the faint imbalance of a real smile. The surface varied subtly, smooth here, faintly rough there, just like living skin. Because it was. The outer shell of plaster hid the truth at first, but examination peeled it away layer by layer. Sinclair had not shaped clay into her likeness. He had built it around her. The medical findings were precise, merciless. A compound extracted from a poisonous plant had been administered, enough to freeze the body completely while leaving the mind awake. She could not move, could not cry out, but she could feel. Sinclair worked slowly, patiently. He coated her in wet clay, one layer at a time, allowing each to stiffen before adding the next. When the form was complete, he sealed it in plaster, preserving the shape he worshipped. The paralysis would have faded within hours. By then it was too late. The clay had hardened. Her chest could barely expand. Tiny channels had been left at her mouth and nose, just enough air to keep her alive longer, long enough to understand what was happening, long enough to suffocate slowly, sealed inside the perfection someone else desired. The examiner believed she remained conscious for nearly 2 days. The most unsettling detail came last. Pressed into the inner layers of clay were faint impressions, distortions, really, where fingers had pushed outward from within, not enough to break free, only enough to show that she had tried. And when Sinclair was led away, still murmuring about wetness and voices and breath trapped in earth, no one could say for certain whether the sculptures lining the walls were truly silent again, or merely waiting to be fed. Sinclair had not waited for death to finish his work. The final refinements of the face, the infinitesimal adjustments no hand could invent from memory, had been made while she still breathed. The eyes told the truth of it. He left them uncovered until the very end, watching them, studying the way light moved across living pupils, capturing the precise moment her expression became what he wanted. Not relief, not terror, something quieter, something surrendered. The court wasted little time. His lawyer spoke at length about exhaustion, obsession, unraveling reason. Letters were produced. Witnesses testified to the strange hours, the isolation, the fixation. It did not matter. The jury returned before the benches had cooled. The sentence was carried out on a winter morning, rope and silence ending a man who believed himself an artist rather than a murderer. But even then, the matter refused to settle. The figure, because no other word fit, though monument or coffin might have been closer, remained in custody after the trial. Destroying it felt like another violation. Preserving it felt unthinkable. In that uncertainty, I submitted a formal request, citing scholarly interest in the effects of prolonged paralysis and suffocation on cardiac tissue. The approval came quickly, too quickly. I suspect relief played its part. Everyone wanted the relic gone. When I began the preservation, I noticed what the initial examination had overlooked. The heart bore none of the expected signs. No frantic damage. No erratic rhythm burned into the muscle. There was no evidence of panic. No final desperate surge one would expect from a conscious body suffocating over days. Instead, the structure suggested calm, regularity, patterns consistent with deep rest, or something akin to focused inward stillness. More unsettling still was the uniformity of the tissue. A heart is typically uneven, shaped by function and necessity. This one was balanced in a way that felt intentional, not grown but arranged, as though every part had been placed with care, guided by a design rather than chance. I cannot account for this through conventional study. It is possible the compound altered physiology in ways we do not yet understand. It is possible the duration of paralysis produced anomalies no one has recorded before. Or it is possible, here I step beyond science, that her awareness, trapped within a body that could no longer respond, withdrew entirely inward. That with nothing left to move, nothing left to resist, her consciousness shaped the only organ still answering her will. The heart, after all, continued its work when all else was locked in silence. It beat, it endured, it remembered. Professor Whitlock's entry ends without certainty, only with this observation, that the sculpture itself was perfect, and that whatever remained of Victoria Sloane may never have truly left it at all. The fire had consumed the sculpture under official supervision, they said. The plaster cracked first, revealing glimpses of the face beneath, fleeting, impossible. For a heartbeat, the expression shifted. The peaceful contentment was gone, replaced by something unspeakable, something that lingered in the memory like a cold shadow. The heart remained with me, preserved, a reminder that the line between genius and madness is narrow, and that once crossed, it may be too late to return. Parsons' voice faded into the heavy silence. The four students stood frozen, the weight of the journal pressing against them as though the room itself had grown heavier. Caldwell squinted at the lantern's dim glow. He could have sworn it flickered, though he tried to dismiss it. Then Young's voice, trembling, pierced the tension. "We should leave now." Before they could move, footsteps appeared in the corridor, a slow, deliberate rhythm accompanied by a faint, tuneless hum. It was like a lullaby for children who would never awaken. The sound stopped just outside the door. "Hide," Parsons hissed, and they scattered, pressing themselves against walls, behind desks, anywhere that might offer refuge. Caldwell extinguished the lantern entirely, swallowing them in darkness, save for the thin, sickly glow of the streetlight through the filthy window. The door creaked open. Professor Whitlock entered, carrying his own lamp, humming that same eerie melody. He moved through the room as though it were empty, as though he belonged entirely to the shadows. The lamp came to rest on his desk. He shrugged off his coat, hung it neatly, and then turned toward the shelves lined with jars. From their hiding spots, the students watched, hearts hammering. Whitlock picked up one jar. It was empty, yet the label remained. The lamplight fell across his face, and Caldwell felt a cold pang grip his chest. Whitlock was smiling, not a simple, pleasant smile, but something else. Something that spoke of secret knowledge, of a joy held tightly and selfishly. It reminded Caldwell too clearly of Sinclair's obsession, the expression the sculptor had hunted in life itself. Whitlock's voice broke the silence, soft and calm, almost casual. "There are 20 jars," he said. "Each contains a heart. Each heart carries its tale," he said, "and preserving it is an art as much as a science. The chemicals maintain the tissue, but the real mastery lies in the timing, the precise moment when a life story reaches its peak. Too soon and the narrative is incomplete, too late and the essence fades." Whitlock's eyes swept the room, never meeting them directly, yet Caldwell felt a chilling certainty. Their hiding spots were no secret to him. He held up the empty jar, turning it in the lamplight as though it were a rare gemstone. "This jar has been waiting," he murmured, "waiting for the right story, the right heart. Remarkable how some lives call to specific organs, how certain hearts demand to be preserved." From his pocket, he produced 4 labels, laying them carefully in a neat row on the desk. Caldwell's eyes darted to the names, trembling as he read Whitlock's precise hand. Caldwell, Parsons, Young, Ashford, the 4 students who had dared to break into the professor's study. Whitlock's smile deepened. "How predictably foolish," he said. "How deliciously conventional. But the story does not end with theft, does it? No. It ends when you see what I truly collect. When you realize some knowledge carries a cost far beyond academic dishonesty." He picked up one of the labels, Caldwell could not tell which, and affixed it to the empty jar. "The question," Whitlock continued, voice calm and measured, is whether this story begins tonight with your decision to break in, or whether it began much earlier. Perhaps the moment I first saw your names on the roster. Perhaps everything since has been a mere progression toward this instant, this room, these jaws. A small, stifled whimper escaped from Young. Whitlock's eyes turned immediately, the smile widening into something exquisite and terrible. "Ah," he said softly, "Young, always the most anxious. I wondered which of you would break first." He began moving toward the bookshelf, his steps slow, deliberate, the hum of his voice casual, almost conversational. "The heart," he said, "is a remarkable organ. 4 chambers beating in perfect rhythm, valves opening and closing like clockwork, electrical pulses rippling through tissue. But the heart," Whitlock murmured, "is never just mechanics. It remembers fear, desire, anger, joy, despair. Every emotion etched into its fibers, every choice and every regret held in its pulse." He reached the bookshelf with a calm that made the air thicken. Young tried to flee, but his legs betrayed him, folding beneath him until he crumpled against the wall. Pale, trembling, utterly powerless, Whitlock knelt, eyes glinting in the lantern's glow, that dreadful, knowing smile spreading across his face. "When I preserve a heart," he whispered almost tenderly, "I capture more than an organ, I capture its story. Every terror, every hope, every desperate moment when the world might have turned differently." His gaze locked on Young. "Your heart, child, already tells a fascinating story. I can hear it from here, racing like a bird trapped inside your chest." Caldwell's voice emerged as a hoarse croak. "You're insane." Whitlock tilted his head, glancing toward Caldwell's hiding spot. "Insane, perhaps, but consider, does documenting, preserving, ensuring certain stories are never lost constitute madness? One day others will study these hearts. They will learn the truth. Knowledge has a cost. Curiosity, noble in theory, can lead to corners from which there is no escape." He rose, leaving Young curled and shivering against the wall, and moved toward the desk. Caldwell pressed himself tighter against the wood, seeking any illusion of safety, but Whitlock did not reach for him. Instead, he lifted the journal Caldwell had been reading, opening it with deliberate care. "You read about Croft," Whitlock said softly, his eyes never leaving the page. "The hand that would not rest. Did you grasp the lesson? Some parts of us refuse separation. Even severed from the body, they pursue what they once knew. His arm, it sought to complete the work it had begun." He turned a page, contemplative, and Whitlock's voice lowered. "But you didn't finish, did you? You missed Abigail Croft's visit to my laboratory 3 months after her husband's death. She came changed, lighter, as if a long-held burden had lifted. She confessed she had buried something else in that garden, something tethered to her for 23 years. Whitlock set the journal aside and lifted Croft's jar, tilting it so the heart swirled slowly in its golden fluid. "Marriage," he continued, voice smooth, almost intimate, "can be its own kind of amputation, a severing of self to accommodate another. Abigail endured cruelty so long she forgot she had a will of her own. But the arm remembered. The arm that struck, that pushed, that demanded obedience, it refused to be ignored. Even in death, it insisted on being recognized, on completing its story." The lantern light trembled as Whitlock's gaze swept the room, and the 4 students felt the weight of those words settle deep into their bones. This was more than anatomy, more than preservation. This was a lesson in what it truly means to linger, to endure, to haunt, and what price must be paid when curiosity trespasses where it should not. "Josiah Croft's cruelty left more than scars," Whitlock continued, his voice calm but carrying a weight that pressed into their chests. "Even severed, that arm remembered. Buried in the soil, fed by nothing but rage and hunger, it discovered a new purpose. Abigail told me she felt it attach itself to her shoulder that night, fingers digging into flesh like roots taking hold. At first, terror gripped her, but then she understood. It moved with intent. It acted where she had lacked courage. It wrapped itself around her husband's throat, and she let it. Parsons stumbled out from behind the desk, disbelief etched across his face. "This is insane," he said, voice trembling. "These are just stories, fictions. You're trying to scare us with fairy tales." Whitlock's eyes softened, almost pitying. "Parsons, the skeptic, ever demanding proof," he murmured. "Very well." He moved deliberately to the shelf holding Victoria Sloane's jar and lifted it into the lamplight. The heart within seemed impossibly alive, its chambers swollen, pulsing even in stillness. "What do you see here?" Whitlock asked. Parsons, drawn despite himself, leaned closer, his trained eye cataloging every detail. "The ventricles enlarged," he whispered, voice shaking. "The tissue uniform, unnatural." He stopped, his face drained of color, hand rising to cover his mouth. Whitlock's calm voice cut through the thick tension. "Look closely at the left ventricle." Parsons peered again and recoiled as if struck. There, pressed into the muscle, clearly outlined against the glass and the amber-preserving fluid, was the unmistakable shape of an eye, wide open, staring back. "She was conscious," Whitlock said quietly. "Conscious while Sinclair worked, conscious as the clay hardened around her, conscious as her heart continued to beat in the dark. The only part she could still control, the heart, became her canvas. Trapped and desperate, her mind turned inward, shaping what remained of her flesh. She watched herself die and made art of it." Young began to weep, silent and shuddering, pressed tight against the bookshelf. Ashford the younger remained frozen near the door, immobile as a rabbit caught in a snake's gaze. Caldwell's throat worked, and a voice he barely recognized escaped his lips. What do you want from us?" Whitlock replaced Victoria Sloane's heart on the shelf and turned fully to face them, the lantern light dancing across his features. His smile was subtle now, almost conversational. "What?" he repeated, his eyes locking onto each of theirs. "I want only that you understand, that you see the truth I've been guarding all these years, that some stories demand a witness, and some knowledge comes at a cost you cannot imagine until it is too late." The room seemed to breathe with them, shadows twisting unnaturally, the faint scent of earth and metal lingering. Every heartbeat, every pulse of their own hearts felt amplified, as if the preserved ones on the shelves were watching them too. And in that moment, each of the students knew what they had sought in curiosity had found them first. "I want nothing from you," Whitlock said gently, almost kindly. "Your endings were settled long before I stepped through that door. The instant you chose to force the lock, the moment you touched the journals, the second you hid instead of leaving, every decision tonight clicked into place like gears already turning." He swept a hand toward the shelves. Rows of glass caught the lamplight, each vessel holding a dark, suspended truth. Every heart here once believed it was steering its own fate. Croft thought power made him untouchable. Sloane trusted the safety of routine. They were mistaken. Their paths were already bending toward this room, toward these jars, just as yours were. "They're going to murder us," Parsons said, his voice flat, hollowed out by certainty. "Murder?" Whitlock echoed, genuinely puzzled. Then he smiled again, softly. "No, my boy, that won't be necessary. You misunderstand. You've been dead for quite some time." The cold struck without warning, sharp and absolute. The lamp flickered, though the air stood still, and Caldwell realized what had been wrong all along. There was no sound beyond the study. No footsteps, No distant voices, no city. The world outside the door had gone mute. "I don't understand," Ashford whispered, finally breaking his silence. Whitlock crossed to the window and beckoned them closer. Against reason, they obeyed. Below, the street was not empty, it was distorted. The cobblestones sagged like soft wax. The buildings wavered when viewed from the corner of the eye. And the fog moved with intention, sliding through the streets like a living thing searching for a scent. "Time isn't a straight line," Whitlock said calmly. "Stories fold back on themselves. Certain moments repeat. This room, this night, it has happened before, it will happen again." He turned to face them fully. "You broke into my study on November 17th, 1887. That is true. But it is also true that on that very night, I found you here and I took your hearts." Caldwell laughed weakly, staring at his hands. They were solid, real. His heart hammered in his chest, wild and undeniable. "This is madness," he breathed. "Then look," Whitlock said softly. Against every instinct screaming at him, Caldwell lifted his gaze. On the shelf beside Croft and Sloane stood 4 additional jars, freshly labeled in the professor's precise hand. "The Heart of Caldwell, student, lost to curiosity, 1887. The Heart of Parsons, student, lost to doubt, 1887. The Heart of Young, student, lost to fear, 1887. The Heart of Ashford, student, lost to silence, 1887. Inside each jar floated a heart, preserved and whole, still faintly darkened in places where terror had once lived. Caldwell's breath hitched as understanding settled like a burial shroud. The beating in his chest slowed, softened, as if responding to a story already finished. Whitlock's voice followed them into the quiet. "You see now, knowledge is never free, and some lessons are learned only when the heart itself is ready to be kept." The truth waited on the shelf, floating quietly in yellow liquid. 4 jars, 4 names, 4 endings frozen in glass. Each heart bore its own damage, tiny ruptures, darkened tissue, scars left not by knives alone, but by terror at the moment of separation. "Those are you," Whitlock said gently. "Not bodies, echoes." He spoke as if explaining a lesson already taught too many times. "This night comes back around like a bad dream. Every few months, you force the door. You hunt for answers you didn't earn. You read my records. You hide when you hear me return. And eventually, you reach the same realization." He paused. "The test you were so desperate to cheat on ended the instant you picked that lock." Parsons shook his head hard as if trying to dislodge the words. "No, this is some trick, hypnosis, poison, something." "Touch your chest," Whitlock said calmly. Parsons laughed once, sharp and brittle, then obeyed. His palm pressed against his waistcoat. He frowned, pressed harder. His fingers searched for the steady rhythm that had lived there his entire life. There was nothing. No pulse, no flutter, just a vast, swallowing emptiness. The absence hit him like vertigo, a hollow so deep it felt as if his body might collapse inward, folding around the void where something vital should have been. Cold spread from his hand, soaking through him, stealing weight and certainty. One by one, the others followed. Caldwell felt it too, the unbearable lightness of a body missing its anchor, as though gravity itself had loosened its grip on him. Young's knees buckled the instant his hand found the emptiness. He slid down the bookshelf, trembling, his mouth opening wide in a scream that never made a sound. The air refused him. Ashford pressed both palms to his ribs and went very still. His outline seemed thinner somehow, as if the missing heart had taken more than flesh. had taken density, presence, reality. The accounts you read weren't stories meant to entertain, Whitlock continued. They were cautions. Croft's severed limb returned because violence remembers. Sloane's mind reshaped her own heart because consciousness does not surrender easily. And you, his gaze moved across them. You are caught in the instant of your own ending. He crossed to his desk and lifted a pen. I keep records, he said, opening a ledger. Each recurrence is noted. Ink scratched softly as he wrote. Young always hides by the shelves. Parsons always demands proof. Caldwell always asks what I want. Ashford always waits until the end to speak. He dotted the page. This is your 7th return. Something inside Caldwell fractured. Memories rushed in and stopped abruptly. He remembered the lock, the lantern, the jars, the journals, but before that, nothing. No yesterday, no childhood, no life beyond this room. Just this moment repeating backward into endless dark. Why, he asked hoarsely, why do we come back? Whitlock considered this as he blotted the ink. Why does a severed limb ache for a body it no longer has? Why does a trapped mind reshape flesh rather than accept helplessness? He closed the book. Some separations are rejected. Your hearts remain here, preserved. But the part of you that reached for forbidden knowledge, that part refuses rest. It returns here, seeking resolution that no longer exists. Parsons swallowed. And you, he asked quietly, what are you? I am a keeper, Whitlock replied. A steward of warnings. To the faculty I am harmless. Odd, they do not enter this room. They do not ask what I truly study. They are content with lectures and credentials. His eyes darkened slightly. My real work happens in the quiet between one heartbeat and the next. He stepped back. You'll fade soon, you always do. An hour, perhaps less. Then this room will be empty again, and I will wait. Caldwell felt it happening. His hands were growing translucent. Young's form blurred like smoke. Parsons looked washed out, barely tethered to the light. Please, Ashford said suddenly, his voice breaking the pattern for the first time. There has to be a way to stop this. Whitlock's expression softened just a fraction. There is only the way all stories end. Acceptance. Understanding that some costs once paid cannot be reclaimed. Your heart stopped beneath my hands long ago. You cannot undo that. He met Caldwell's eyes, but you can accept what you are now. And if we can't, Caldwell asked, though the answer already pressed against him. Whitlock's smile returned, patient and inevitable. Then I will see you again, he said quietly, in a few months. Or maybe it will be weeks, Whitlock continued, his voice already drifting away from them, and we'll speak again. You'll fade. You'll return. Again and again. 7 times so far. Perhaps 70 more. Perhaps 700, perhaps without end. The room lost its edges. Walls softened. Shelves smeared into shadow. Caldwell felt himself thinning as if substance were leaking out of him. The final clear image burned itself into his mind. The shelf of jars, the hearts floating in silence, and 4 among them marked with their names. 4 hearts waiting with infinite patience for bodies that would never come back. Until next time, gentlemen, Whitlock murmured. Darkness closed in. And then, as it always did, it released him. Caldwell stood on the stone steps outside the medical school, cold biting through his coat. Above him, the 3rd-floor window glowed faintly. Young hovered nearby, shivering despite his scarf. Parsons frowned at his pocket watch, unsettled by a discrepancy he couldn't quite explain. Ashford stood slightly apart, quiet, hunched, saying nothing. The exam papers, Parsons said suddenly. Whitlock keeps them in his study. Caldwell nodded before realizing he'd agreed. "We could get in," he said. The thought felt old, worn smooth by repetition. "The lock won't be difficult." They exchanged looks. Young's unease flickered. Ashford stayed silent, but the temptation settled over all of them like a shared breath. A few minutes upstairs, a glance at the answers, future secured. What harm could it possibly cause? Above them, a shadow crossed the lit window. Whitlock stood there, framed by lamplight, watching. Though his face was too distant to see, they all felt the expression, calm, knowing, quietly pleased. He had been expecting them. He always did. And somewhere behind him, on a shelf among many others, 4 empty jars waited. Clean, labeled, ready, each bearing a name, a date, and a story that would circle back on itself endlessly. Some thresholds once crossed do not reopen behind you. Some debts once paid are never returned. And some hearts once taken continue their work in darkness, beating without bodies, waiting for the inevitable moment when their owners come back searching for what they lost, only to find themselves preserved forever in glass, memory, and the unchanging present of their own mistake. Private record of Professor Edmund Whitlock. November 17, 1887. Manifestation 7 occurred precisely as anticipated. Duration, 53 minutes. Deviations from prior occurrences, negligible. Caldwell again resisted acceptance. Parsons demanded empirical confirmation and struggled even after receiving it. Young's response followed the established pattern, fear escalating rapidly into panic. Ashford the younger remained silent until the terminal phase, when he voiced the recurring inquiry regarding cessation. "I am increasingly convinced their condition is not sustained by ignorance but by refusal. They comprehend their state. They know their hearts rest on my shelves. Yet comprehension does not guarantee surrender. Perhaps this is the true punishment, not recurrence, but the endless belief that repetition might eventually produce a different outcome." The specimens remain in exceptional condition. No decay observed. On the contrary, I note a faint luminescence in low light and a subtle motion not attributable to fluid displacement. They pulse despite the absence of circulation. They beat without purpose. I sometimes wonder whether I have achieved something entirely new, not preservation but containment. Consciousness bound to tissue, souls tethered to matter, neither alive nor properly gone. There is no guidance in medical texts for such a state. Theological sources may speculate, but I have little patience for superstition cloaked as doctrine. Next manifestation projected, February 23, 1888. I will be prepared.